I want to thank everyone for coming today. My name is Hardin Coleman, and I'm the new dean as of July 1 in the School of Education. And I want to say that one of the reasons when this job posting became available in the Chronicle of Higher Education and started appearing across the country, one of the first things that made this an attractive idea was the Chelsea Partnership. There are a few universities across the country who have had the bravery to take on a really deep-seated relationship with a public school. In fact, since it was 20 years ago, it set the stage for many others. Historically, schools would create their own little precious lab school, bring it in-house, send all the faculty, children there, and say what a good job they were doing on education. So for a university to take on a public school, particularly a public school in areas of significant economic and cultural diversity, was really quite brave, challenging, and wonderful. So today, what we have here are a panel of people who have been deeply involved in that process. We're giving the opportunity to share their perspectives on that experience and hopefully what its implications are for the future of university school partnerships, K-12 education in general as well. So I get to the pleasure of introducing the panelists who will speak for about 10 minutes each. And then, and as many people know, I'm not the most time-urgent person, so I'll do my best to keep you on track. And then there'll be a little bit of time for summary, and then we can open up for questions from the audience. And Mary in the back will have the microphones that you can share. So to my right is Mary Burke, who is currently the Deputy Superintendent of Chelsea Public Schools, a lifelong educator who's committed to improving urban education, and we're most proud that she just received her doctorate in education from BU this May. Let's see, let me make sure Mike Caulfield is presently chairman of the Chelsea School Committee, and prior to leaving Chelsea Public Schools in 2000, he served as a math teacher at Chelsea High beginning in 1987, and from 92 to 99, he was very active in the Chelsea Teachers Union. As we all know, that one of the most important relationships within the school community is between the school, the administrators, and their unions. To my left is David Driscoll, who's a lifelong educator, served as the 22nd Commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Education. And as Commissioner, he oversaw the development of the state's curriculum frameworks, implementation, expansion of the Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System, which we all know we spend a lot of time thinking about and understanding, the development of state school and district accountability system, and the development and administration of the educator certificate program and new licensure regulations. To my immediate left is Robert Hildreth, who is founder and president of the International Bank Services Incorporated, a Boston-based company that trades services and bank loans from Latin America, Asia, Europe, and North America, and you cannot ask him questions about your personal financial issues today. Bob is currently the vice chair of the BU's Board of Overseers. He has a long involvement in supporting BU's initiative in the Chelsea Public School with a particular interest in early childhood education. He has also supported immigrant education and services throughout the Commonwealth. My personal introduction to Bob is through one of my wife's cousins, who is one of the social worker in the early childhood program, Linda Kennedy, who would talk great things about him for the past 10, 20 years in terms of his support for their work. To my left, appropriately, Doug and I have an ongoing argument about whether who's the liberal and who's the conservative, and I think he's the classic liberal, so being on my left is appropriate. Is associate provost and assistant to the president for outreach and special initiatives at Boston University. He oversees BU Myriad engagement with K-12 education and is also coordinating the university-wide assessment reaccreditation process. Prior to joining the central administration, Dr. Sear served for 5 years as dean of this School of Education. Before entering the deanship, most importantly, he spent 5 years as superintendent of the Chelsea Public Schools in Chelsea, Mass. I want to personally thank Doug for all the wonderful things he's done for me in making my transition to this position smooth and enjoyable. So I'd like to start with Mary and give you your 10 minutes and go.
Okay. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation to speak with you this morning about something that's near and dear to my heart, and it is the City of Chelsea and the Chelsea Public Schools, but most particularly the Boston University-Chelsea Partnership. Let me just, frame all of this for you. In September 1977, I was a freshman in college, with all the fear and anxiety that brings. In one class, the professor went around the room asking each of us to introduce ourselves and to state the name of the community and the high school from which we enrolled. Throughout my years as a student in the Chelsea school system, I had learned to timidly say that I was from Chelsea or that I was a graduate of the Chelsea High School. Not that I wasn't proud of my city or my high school, but as Chelsea students, we were used to the smirks, the snickers, and sometimes the outright ridicule. Chelsea was always in the newspaper during these years for corruption, for failing schools, for violence, for fires. Chelsea was the punchline in many a joke. Chelsea was not the location people wanted to move to for any extended length of time. Rather, Chelsea was where you got your start and you moved on to what many thought were better communities, better school systems. Among my peers, Chelsea was the place they couldn't wait to escape from. Ladies and gentlemen, like George Bailey, the lead character in the classic Frank Capra film It's a Wonderful Life, who never left Bedford Falls, I never left Chelsea. I have lived my entire life in Chelsea. Not unlike many of our students in Chelsea today, I grew up in a 3-decker. There were 7 of us living in a 5-room, second-floor apartment. My mother, father, 3 brothers, and a sister. My siblings and I are first-generation college-goers. I haven't moved far. I now live around the corner from where I grew up. I am the mother of 4 children, ranging in age from 26 to 17. My 17-year-old will graduate from Chelsea High School this June, 32 years after I graduated, and 71 years after my father graduated from Chelsea High School. Chelsea is and always has been, from the late 1800s onward, a gateway community for so many. Most particularly, our demographics boast of 79.8% Hispanic students, 82.5% first language not English, 86.8% low income, and we have an annual student mobility rate of 31%. This is who we are as a community. In the Chelsea Public Schools, we welcome newcomers to our country. We provide them with a foundation and help them move on to attain their American dream. We welcome refugees, immigrants, and urban migrants. We welcome those who are in greatest need. This is our richness and our calling as an urban education system and as a community. We serve a purpose. Chelsea Public Schools before the partnership was a very different school system than post-partnership. 4 years after I graduated from Chelsea High School in 1977, I returned to complete my student teaching. One day during class, my supervising teacher was called out into the hallway by the principal and assistant principal, where my supervising teacher was handed her pink slip. In those days, stable budgeting practices were non-existent. Layoffs and subsequent rehiring 2 and 3 months down the road was the norm. My supervising teacher was sent home for the day. She was too distraught to carry on with the class, and I was asked by the administration to take over for the remainder of the day. And that was my introduction to teaching in Chelsea. The American education system in Chelsea was a dismal failure prior to 1988. As a former student and then returning as a teacher, I can attest to the fact that Chelsea educators back then were good people with good intentions. As a group, we were dedicated to the profession of teaching, and we fervently believed we were doing our best at providing a future for Chelsea students. But the system was not there to support us. The education system, as it was meant to function and support us in our work, was non-existent. We were 9 schools without one cohesive vision and one common purpose. We lacked policies and procedures upon which to stake our principles. Most of all, we were not held accountable or responsible for student learning. High-quality education existed in our school district, but inconsistently, classroom to classroom, school to school. For many of us, urban education was our chosen profession, our vocation. But the fundamental infrastructures needed for us to do our job were missing. Vision, high standards, coherence, collaboration, responsibility, and accountability. Without these, apathy and mediocrity prevailed. The system failed us as educators, but it most importantly failed our families, our parents, and our students. The partnership was not perfect, and mistakes were made on both sides in the beginning years, but for me there were 6 areas that stand out as significant areas of improvement. First, the new schools. In 1996, I moved into the brand new Kelly Elementary School. I left behind the Mary C. Burke Elementary School, a building built in 1892, and I kid you not, the faculty room, the restroom, was a water closet with a pull-chain toilet and the water box in the ceiling. The holes in the roof had so many that we had to be careful when we came in the morning to make sure that the urban raccoon and the urban squirrel were not in our classroom before our students arrived. The other difference that I saw was the vision that came in with the partnership. Prior to the partnership, a teacher was hired, given a classroom, told where the books were located, and left to figure out the rest. In the first year of the partnership, leaders clearly articulated a common vision, measured by the 17 standards or goals. The vision focused us and confirmed for us that students came first. We never had that before. Leadership. The partnership in the early years, like many urban districts, struggled to maintain stable leadership at the district level in the position in particular of superintendent and assistant superintendent. Leadership was needed, but leadership that was stable, consistent, and clear. It wasn't until the 5th year that we had stability in the offices of the superintendent and assistant superintendent. With stable leadership, we started to believe that BU was in it with us for the long haul. With stable leadership, relationship and trust began to take hold. We started to have honest conversations about our strengths and weaknesses. In the area of curriculum, at the beginning of the Boston University-Chelsea partnership, there was no organized curriculum in the Chelsea schools. So the textbook became everybody's curriculum. The table of contents in the textbook served as our scope and sequence, and the end of chapter questions for the publisher served as student assessment. In the area of professional development, again, we were severely lacking. Teachers chose and paid for their own professional development. If a teacher couldn't afford it on their salary, they just didn't take any. The very few district-sponsored professional development opportunities offered frequently had little or no connection or relationship to school and district initiatives. Professional development was key. It was a key component to the plan of urban education reform. And it was the professional development opportunities provided to all of us that really pushed us forward. It gave us pride in our work, and it empowered us. And it was the faculty of Boston University who volunteered their time, who came over to Chelsea, offered us free courses many times, seminars, workshops. We traveled over to Boston University and took the courses, many times free of charge. And most certainly, we were encouraged to pursue higher degrees. Many of us attained our master's degree and our doctorate from Boston University, and I am definitely one. So the 6th thing, the pride. The partnership empowered us and helped to restore our pride in ourselves and in our profession, in what we did every day in that classroom. At the end of the partnership, we are considered highly trained and we are highly sought after. We have worked collaboratively, informing, writing, and publishing research alongside BU professors. Our expertise and knowledge is known and respected. Our voice is heard and listened to. But most of all, our students stand tall among their peers. They compete and they excel. They succeed. Stating that you are from Chelsea today does not elicit the same reaction as it did in 1977. Chelsea is no longer the punchline in a joke. Educators for years to come will research, analyze, and critique both positively and negatively the BU-Chelsea partnership. Throughout the last few months, I have been asked one question over and over again. But did they really improve the test scores? The presumption is that we should be able to encapsulate urban education reform into one quantitatively verifiable yes or no. We can't. This is the elephant in the room that clouds the true picture and true complexity of urban education reform. If we are looking for an easy answer, if we are looking for that one easy model to replicate and follow, then we will be disappointed. Because, ladies and gentlemen, education reform is complex and messy. And urban education reform is even more complex and messier. The true measure of the success of the BU Chelsea partnership is found in the stories and the lessons learned. From the lessons learned, we should inform future urban education reform. Replication of the pieces that worked is the secret, but the pieces must be considered within the context of that particular community and within time and place. If they match, you can replicate. From the partnership, we now know that understanding who you are as a school district, your demography, is critical. Having and holding a vision is important. Stable leadership is essential, and a coherent articulation of the curriculum, instruction, and professional development plan is paramount to instilling pride and a hunger for success. Today, I am before you to state definitively, in my opinion, that the BU Chelsea partnership was a success. BU kept its promise to the community of Chelsea to reform and improve the school system. I state this as a student, parent, teacher, and administrator. Of those students who stay with us in the Chelsea schools, we know their performance increases with time. My own doctoral research empirically supports this statement. The bottom line of the partnership story is that BU did something. While others talked about urban education reform and may have engaged in some activities in a small scale, BU did something. The BU leadership went into the trenches and worked to try to reform a failing school system. Some of the lessons are transferable to urban education, and some will remain unique to the Chelsea experience. But the investment in the Chelsea experience will not be wasted. The history and stories must be told and analyzed. We must carry the work and the lessons learned to the next urban school. That is the responsibility of the next generation of BU leaders. And from someone in the trenches, I leave you with the following challenges. Continue to research what works in urban education reform. Recognize that true education reform is a community affair, engaging and collaborating with all stakeholders, including our neighbors in higher education. Inspire students in your schools of education to teach in urban centers. We need the most dedicated and committed. Suburban school districts never seem to have a problem receiving resumes. We do. Engage the media in deeper and a broader understanding of urban education reform. We need them to be less critical and judgmental. And advocate and hold legislators accountable for failing to prioritize in action, deed, and finances public education. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael, tough act to follow.
It certainly is. My name is Mike Caulfield. In 1987, I began my work in Chelsea as a math teacher. In terms of what I would like to say today, I can provide to you some of my experiences, but I also want to share with you some of the feelings that I've had. I've had the benefit of being very closely linked with the Chelsea Public Schools and the community of Chelsea for the past 20 years. I did not grow up in Chelsea, but when I was hired in 1987, I could sense that Chelsea was a very special place. My wife and I have 2 children. My wife is black, I'm white, and to tell you the truth, I did not want issues of race or ethnicity playing a role in how they grew up. And I could see right from the very first day how diverse Chelsea was in terms of where all these students were coming from, where all the parents were coming from, and the fact that people didn't care. They didn't care where you came from. They more or less cared who you were and what you were. And they treated folks with respect. And because of that, my wife and I bought a home in 1988, I believe it was, and we started our family there. I had 2 stepchildren, and my girls, Madeline and Emily, have gone to the Chelsea schools from the very beginning, and they have both done very, very well. And it is truly the efforts of Boston University that assisted the city of Chelsea in turning around those schools. Keep in mind that in 1988, after a study was done by Boston University School of Management, that I guess you could call it a bit of a sales pitch. It was very aggressive. Dr. Silva was right at the forefront of all of this. And one of the statements that used to make us cringe as teachers, because I was teaching there, is the Chelsea Public Schools were contributing to the benign neglect of the children of Chelsea. And it was a real stinging statement. As a teacher, knocking himself out, trying to provide not only for his family, for the students in his classroom, and really doing the very best that he could, considering the limited amount of resources. We were shocked by these statements. And yet, with the benefit of 20 years, I can truly appreciate why those types of statements had to be made. Keep in mind that Dr. Silva was saying this in 1989. The Education Reform Act really came out 4 years later. I believe it was 1993 that the Education Reform Act came out. And we recognized the fact that in cities there was an inadequate funding formula contributing to an inadequate level of resources that made kids that were going to school in this city at a competitive disadvantage to their suburban counterparts. Because of that, the formulas for delivering resources to public schools had to be recalculated. So even though it was a real contentious period of time, in the long run, it truly helped. And in terms of my own career, I got involved in the Chelsea Teachers Union. And as a member of the Teachers Union and as the president of the Teachers Union, I regularly had to negotiate contracts. Keep in mind that the Chelsea teachers were among the lowest paid in the state of Massachusetts. Boston University recognized this this inadequacy and immediately moved to address that issue. And over the course of 20 years, our salaries have continued to increase. We're not at the level of Boston. We may not be at the level of Revere or Everett, but we have made substantial progress. We are much more competitive than we used to be. And that is truly a recognition of the efforts of the Chelsea teachers, but also the efforts of our administrators who continually determine what the right level of pay would be for employees of the school system. I found that Boston University brought a level of professionalism to labor negotiations. There were no mass firings. There was one particular point in time where teachers were laid off, but they were fairly quickly brought back. There were lots of mistakes made early on both sides. However, through discussion, we were able to come up with some common vision as to what's expected of all of us in terms of managing these schools. I'm certainly not going to say that it was a bed of roses, because it certainly wasn't. There were times when it was extremely contentious. But through it all, we've managed to do very well. And I think that if you could see what we had in 1987 and what we have now 20 years later, it will be like night and day. But it took an awful lot of work each day of those 20 years in order to make the schools what they are today. Certainly in terms of our facilities. Our facilities are top-notch, and there is a much better attitude in managing those facilities in the sense that schools are not allowed to ever be filthy or dirty. When we talk about budget cuts on a particular year, those facilities are maintained right at the highest levels. There are regular and routine maintenance checks. The fields look great. The grounds look great. People are proud of their schools. And on a personal note, I'm so proud of the schools that I donate my time freely during the summer to plant flowers at the high school to make that high school look good. It's important for people to feel like schools are a part of their family, and the Chelsea Public Schools are a part of my family. And at the same time, I think that others in our community recognize how important it is for some young people who may not have both parents at home to work with adults that have an education, but also offer those kids an important opportunity to seek a vision for themselves, to be able to figure out what they want to be in life and how they have to go about getting to that goal. Because there are lots of kids that we have that just don't have those types of supports at their home. And we've been able to improve the attitude of our students, but also to improve levels of achievement. Certainly you can measure it with MCAS scores and things like that, but that's just one small measure of the types of relationships that occur in the schools now. Very, very briefly, just to give you an idea of where the school is at, if you look at the resources that we had in 1987, I believe the school department budget was close to 12 or 13 million. Right now, our budget is around 60 million. We have been able to harness the resources necessary to educate children. We have programs for 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds that make sure they're ready for school. We have programs for high school students where we engage in internships and things of that nature. I'm presently serving on a committee where we articulate the fact that if we have top-notch teaching, we're going to have top-notch student performance. And it's really quite clear. Because of that, and because of the ability to analyze what we do every single day and take a good hard look at it, we are able to be much more effective. And we had a school committee meeting last night, and I'm not going to suggest that apathy is the reason that folks aren't calling up all the time, but we have a level of professionalism in Chelsea that parents are very, very satisfied. Perhaps there are instances where they would want more, but I can honestly say that things have improved to the point where people in Chelsea are proud of their schools. They don't send their kids to the parochial schools or the private schools in the same numbers that they used to, which is certainly a testament as to what parents are choosing. But Chelsea itself has come a long way and will continue to come a long way. And sometimes you can't see that benefit because you're so close to it. But in 20 years, I can tell you, it is like night and day, and I truly appreciate the efforts that Boston University provided to us. And certainly as alumni, you should be proud of your association with that effort, because even though you may not see those kids, maybe you just drive by Chelsea, but believe me, it has truly changed the lives of many, many people, and certainly my life, and I certainly want to thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to submit that I'm the only one up here that's going to be objective. I wasn't born under the bridge or any of that. But truthfully, because of the various roles and positions I had during the entire partnership, I do think I bring an outside and objective view. First of all, when Boston University began the partnership back in 1989, and the work leading up to it, I was a local superintendent in Melrose, where Bob used to be from, and his father made a phenomenal contribution, by the way, to the city. I was on the executive board of the state superintendents, and frankly, our perception was that Boston University was underestimating the challenges that they were facing, and thought it was going to be a lot easier than it was. And so we were a little bit the doubting Thomases, if you will, knowing that they would run into a lot of difficulties, which I think was the case. Fast forward to I became deputy commissioner, and we at the department had to be in really a semi-takeover through the courts, not the way it was done in Chelsea, but we wound up in a supervisory position in the Lawrence Public Schools, where I spent as deputy commissioner 2 days a week in Lawrence, and in the office, sort of looking over the shoulder of the superintendent, et cetera, although I must say we worked in partnership. The chair of our board at that time, the chair of the Board of Education here in Massachusetts, a shy, retiring guy named John Silba, came up with me one day and said something, and the next thing I knew, all the bilingual parents were marching in the street. So I had that experience. And then finally, of course, as a candidate for commissioner, and being interim commissioner at the time and responsible to work with Doug and others here in Chelsea, I was opposed by the leadership here at Boston University in my candidacy for commissioner. So I prevailed, by the way. So I submit to you that I am therefore objective. And when I look at this partnership and what's happened over 20 years. And I want to say at the beginning, because we're probably going to spend some time talking about some of the challenges and some of the things that were underestimated, et cetera. And there were plenty of those. But I want to say, as our first two speakers did, even though they're not objective, I would say that the partnership from Boston University with the Chelsea Public Schools was a significant success. And we've talked about a lot of the things that Boston University brought. And you, particularly those of you that are in your 50th reunion year, should be very proud of what occurred. Obviously, the new schools we've talked about, the emphasis on early childhood education, et cetera. All the things that Mary and Mike talked about are true. I think it also is true that there was underestimation of the challenges that urban education faces. However, of course, there's a culture, and there was a culture at that time, and I see it now in I'm doing some work since I've left, and work with school boards, they call them, school committees in various parts of the country, and I see the kind of culture, particularly in urban areas, that was true in Chelsea and other urban areas here in Massachusetts. It was just the expectation, the patronage, the micromanagement, all of the really things that which made things very inefficient for school systems and does now. The other thing that occurred, of course, during this partnership, as Mike referred to, was the coming of education reform at a crucial time, 4 years after the partnership began. First of all, that brought much needed and necessary resources through our foundation formula. Commonwealth of Massachusetts spent $2 billion in new monies from 1993 to the year 2000 to fulfill its obligation under the foundation budget, which was a tremendous investment. Just a couple of places that I would talk about, and then give my version of why I think we can show that we can. It's been proven that it's a success. First of all, I think the challenges that Boston University faced are that it is not only complex, but you're dealing with human beings of all ways, whether it's parents or kids, and so when you do that, you run into difficulties that you can't control. I think about my very first interaction with Chelsea under the Boston University partnership was in establishing the no school calls for snow, which, by the way, is the biggest deal for a superintendent of schools, is calling off school when it snows, by the way.
That's for sure.
And
You're never right.
it means you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and you put your finger up in the air and you listen to all these people who don't know what they're doing with high pressures and low pressures. And then you make the call and you call off school, and of course it doesn't snow, or you don't call off school and there's a blizzard. So we get tired of, particularly here in the Boston area, it was very difficult because often it would snow from Melrose into Boston, but then be rain from Woburn north. So a few of us as superintendents got together and said, look, we're going to hang together. We're all just going to either call it or not call it and just hang together. And so I became kind of one of the conduits, and I dealt with all the superintendents from Boston out to Melrose. And so that included Chelsea. So I had a call from Deanna Lamb, the new superintendent in Chelsea, who said, I was given your name because I understand if there's no school, I have to call you, and how does that all work? And I said, well, most of us get up about 4:30 in the morning. We got to make the decision by 5:30 because of the bread and the milk and the whatever and the buses. And she said to me, so what happened? I said, well, we call each other. She said, let me give you the name and number of my domestic assistant. She'll take care of that. So much for Deanna Lamb getting involved at 5:30 in the morning. So this poor little person used to have to decide whether to have school or not. So that was my first. So I think that the challenges were really, it's a very, very complex system. And I think that sometimes when you think things are simple, a superintendent was the main. Mary mentioned this fact. You draw it up on the board. You hire a very strong leader with strong credentials, and she doesn't stay. And then the next person doesn't stay. And so something that we're aware of at the local level, you get a lot of turnover. And certainly Mary's dissertation is on mobility, the issue of transient students. I remember John Silver saying, one of the problems we have is transient students. And I kept saying, yeah, I know. I mean, we know this. But it was new to him and so forth. The challenges around the bilingual education and the bilingual parents in the pack. I mean, most of us, I think, including people at Boston University over the years, originally bought into the theory that the best way to teach a child who, and typically Spanish, but it can be a number of languages, as you know now, the best way to teach them is through their own language, that you build off of what they have, and so this transitional bilingual education. It sounds logical, typical of education. We claim it's in the research. We don't know, but we claim it is. And truthfully, what was happening, of course, is we were winding up with kids that were illiterate in two languages. I mean, they didn't have a strong base in Spanish, either in the home or themselves. So we're building off weakness. We were hiring a number of people because of the need to hire, or the bureaucracy of bilingual education. We're hiring a number of people who really didn't have very good English skills, et cetera. And so Boston University understood that, and of course it became a huge political issue, et cetera. So I want to say in closing that people have said, well, we were successful, maybe it doesn't show up in MCAS scores and so forth. I beg to differ. I don't think the problem is Chelsea's performance. I think Chelsea's performance is clear. The problem is both MCAS, which is getting better, and No Child Left Behind, which needs to get better, are what they are, which is only a snapshot in time. So particularly in the case of No Child Left Behind, which required us to test in grades 3 through 8 so that you could see the progress. You're really only judging this year's fourth graders versus last year's fourth graders. And so as soon as we now have the ability at the state level, now that we have the data, and the federal government, with some of our urging, has finally accepted growth models, now you're going to see. And in a place like Chelsea and other urban areas in Massachusetts, it's going to be much fairer. Because now you're going to be able to judge kids over time. And you're going to be able to see what happens, particularly the kids that are in and out, and you can correct for that and so forth. I think on that basis, not only, and by the way, in raw scores, I point out to you that the new commissioner announced the MCAS scores this year from a school in Chelsea because of the progress that they had made. I certainly saw it while I was commissioner, because we did have the ability to look. Now, you know, the newspapers take over, it becomes the star of the day and all that sort of thing. But clearly, we saw, and by the way, our urban areas and our vocational schools in general have done a terrific job. I think a lot of that has to do with ed reform, which we can talk about. But clearly, here in Chelsea, there was tremendous success. When you correct for transiency and mobility and look at the various issues that occur, and you look at growth, clearly beyond us saying that there's new schools and more efficiency and all that kind of thing, let alone the monies that Boston University spent in kind and in many ways to support Chelsea, in addition to the state funding and so forth. Clearly, I think there's no question objectively that there is great success here in Chelsea. So finally, I just say that I've often thought that at the Department of Education, we don't have the kids either. What our job is to set the conditions by which schools and districts can improve teaching and learning such that you get improved student achievement. It's really as simple as that. And I think to that extent, when you look at what Boston University has accomplished in Chelsea, it's really a completely different school system today than it was. And that's why I say it's clearly a great success.
I agree with that.
Bob?
Is Kevin here?
Kevin
I think he had to run out to...
Okay, he was going to pass around some pages. Good, thanks so much. Well, my name's Bob Hildreth. My wife had Dave as a teacher, and my dad taught with Dave for many, many years, I think. and you certainly knew my mom, who was a teacher as well. So it's the Melrose Mafia today. If any of you know where Melrose is, it's very close to Chelsea. It's just one town away. Melrose, Revere, Chelsea, I believe, is the way the geography works. I'm here to ask a question and hopefully to suggest some answers. I think it's an interesting question for all of you, and that is, how do you get private donors to support public education? It's rather counterintuitive. Think of your own towns. What if you picked up the local newspaper and found out that somebody you didn't know, who didn't live in your town, whose children didn't go to your schools, all of a sudden give you a hunk of money? You would say, you would think a couple of things. You'd think, well, isn't that nice? And then you'd think, what a fool. Maybe in that order. But that's what happened in this case. The answers I'm going to give you about why somebody who's not from Chelsea, who's not from BU, would end up devoting 20 years and I guess over $1 million, as you'll see in those tables that you've just been handed out, mainly is 4 things. The first thing was a grand vision. The second was local leadership. The third was, this wasn't just Chelsea, it was Chelsea and BU, the external links. And finally, something which is so important if you read Business Week or Forbes lately about people who give money is this program in Chelsea had the flexibility to allow me and other donors to participate in its strategy. We could actually suggest things, tweak things, change things. And that's what today's donor wants to do. He doesn't give to the United Way anymore, unfortunately, to a certain extent. He doesn't give to the General Appeal. He gives, or she gives, to something that they can get intimately involved with. And man, did I get involved with Chelsea, both feet. So let's go over those 4 things. In 1988, when I came back to Boston, I picked up the Boston Globe, and I read about Silber's grand vision for Chelsea. And he did have a grand vision. This wasn't going to just be about Chelsea. This was going to be that John Silber knew how to change the American school system, and he was going to use Chelsea as his launching pad. That was what was at stake, right? So he combined it with what was my main cause, and has been my main cause throughout my life, has been immigration and how to make the immigration experience better for Americans. I'm a Mick. I'm an Irishman. And my grandfather's picture from Ireland, from County Derry, is in the living room, and that's something that I was told to be very proud about. So that grand vision I bought into hook, line, and sinker. And the fact that it was in education also fit that it wasn't just my father, but my entire extended family. Their profession was about education. At a Thanksgiving meal, everybody around the table over the age of 21, and there might be 20 of us, were teachers. That's how much we're involved in education. So it seemed like a pretty easy hook for me to get involved with. The second thing, though, that was so important was local Chelsea leadership. I'll step back and say I was also brought in by BU leadership. And I think that the most consistent person throughout this, who kind of shepherded me, who was my mentor, was Doug Sears. Doug Sears, who was superintendent, you'll learn, he became a very good friend. And so he told me many times enough about Chelsea to get me really worried about my money. I mean, it was an up and down experience, but that kind of transparency meant that I was never, ever getting sold a bill of goods. And to that extent, I don't know if I was objective, but I certainly was a worrier. So that's a little bit different. But the leadership in Chelsea that I became enamored of was the leadership of the Early Childhood Center. Now, it's very much like Mary. I mean, it was local, produced, hard, scrapple teachers who knew about Chelsea and who cared deeply about Chelsea, and God damn it, they were going to make Chelsea work. And so every year that I got to see them, it was just the plus. I would go into the Early Childhood Center, and if I would urge anybody who wants to get renew their belief in American education to go into that center. You won't be surprised. It's called the Silber Center now. But, hey, he deserves it. But not only is the facility spotlessly clean, by the way, this school, when it was built, was the largest elementary school building in America. So it's a substantial school. Not only is the school spotless, but they break it down into all of these classrooms. When you go in, you have the teacher, you have the aide, you have a moderate amount of usually Hispanic kids there's hardly room for the kids because they have so many supplies. It is so rich, it's so colorful, it's so warm, it's so inviting. And then, as good as that is, it's not as good as when you go into the head office and you sit down with the principal and the assistant principal. They have, I don't know how many, the principal has how many teachers in that facility? Quite a few. About 80 teachers? There is, how many? Doesn't that mark a very large elementary school?
Oh, absolutely.
Huge. Huge. It runs so well. And,
May I interject?
Yes.
But it's 800 3- and 4-year-olds.
800 3- and 4-year-olds. Isn't that an amazing? And yet, you know something? They're not herded at all. You don't find, like in the 1920s, 40 kids. You don't find that their heads are down on their desks because the teacher has to worry about discipline. You find small units all engaged. I mean, it's something. But I was there for each step of the way. It didn't just happen. And a lot of times, I had to advocate for it to happen. The next thing was external links. Chelsea, by itself, like all of your towns, would have never gotten me involved. Because I'm just from a different town. I really don't go up to Wakefield and say, hey, can I give you some money? The thought has never passed through my head.
I wanted to.
So they treated me like professional developers. They, at first, as you can see, turn to that material that I gave you. You can really draw patterns. See how the first years were 1,000, 1,000, then it went to 10,000, then it went to 20,000. That was the work of the BU Development Office drawing me in. I can still remember a guy named Mike Sandler, who came to my office with a much bigger vision. He had created something called a Different September Foundation, and he said, boy, am I happy to meet you. And he put the Silber vision into dollars of, let's do this, let's do that, let's move this ball forward. And then he set me up for the big kahuna. Look what happens there. That was a Different September Foundation. The fella after Mike Sandler, who was in charge, came into my office one day. Do you know we want to build an early childhood center? We want to be the first town to give free education to 3- and 4-year-olds. I mean, there aren't other towns, even to this day, that do that in the number that Chelsea does in Massachusetts, right? That's correct. Yeah. So I said, but we don't have enough money. and if you give us money, BU will match it 1-for-1. And I said, really? And I was almost crying when I said, you can have my money. Well, take it, please. So there I was in for $750,000, right? And back when it almost meant something. And we built 10 classrooms out of it. And let me go through the bottom half of that chart. As soon as I gave that money, I had the hand on the door of my my office, and I said, wait a second. How do I know that Chelsea won't just take these classrooms in a few years and fill them with people other than 3- and 4-year-olds? So I said, I want a guarantee. I want a guarantee for 10 years and I want it voted on by the Chelsea School Department and even, because it involved money, by the Chelsea City Council. And that ended up, at least Doug has told me, maybe to make me feel good, that really solidified Chelsea's long-term commitment to early childhood education. And then when I did that, I said to myself, I can really affect what happens in Chelsea. I can contribute not only my treasure, but also my thinking and my time. So every single one of those contributions, which are much bigger down below, like the next one is $100,000, right? Well, I went to the superintendent and I said, I'm worried. How do we know that the kids are getting, that this is really working? So we hired APT. We came in, a whole year of study, and Chelsea took all of that material and changed their program. A lot of things were good, but a lot of things could be made better. APT is no small outfit. You don't get APT in a town like Chelsea. I mean, APT 2 weeks ago just got a $250 million grant to help England. So this is really high-level folks, consultants, I think they are. Anyway, then we go on to the next 100,000. Look at your chart there. That 100,000. I visited the school, and I found out that because of budget cuts, they had taken away some of the aids. I said, okay, I'll put some money in, but you have to put some money in. Let's get those aids back into the classrooms, and we did it. The final amount of money was the early child, and this is a measure of the success of early childhood education. They got a grant of, how much was it? Wasn't it close to $2 million? Was
it early reading first?
From the federal government. Yeah. Acknowledging this isn't given often. So this isn't just a grant. This has research in it. So I said, after I heard it, you know what? Let's put a new classroom in there that meets the research needs of what's it called? Reading first?
Early reading first.
Early reading first. So they, in every one of those grants, I came up with the idea. They were not after me. They weren't gold diggers. They were, I mean, look at how long this thing goes for, 20 years. Don't I have anything better to do? I was a young man when I started this. But that flexibility is so important. And it's something which I'm trying to get into BU giving now. This will be my last thing. About 2 years ago, I got a brochure from the Harvard Kennedy School. And this brochure had a list of 20 research projects that those professors were involved in. And they said, if you're interested in any one of these projects, call us up. We'll put you in touch with the professor. We'll have you involved with the project, see the results, go to the symposiums and seminars, and they got a lot of money from it. I highly, and this was a lot of really what I did at BU. I got involved with a particular project. I'm not building a dorm here, although if any of you want to build a dorm, I think that's wonderful. But there's another way of giving, and that is
we'll renovate this building.
We'll renovate this. But also you can get involved potentially in one of the projects that Hardin's professors are involved with. And that is so rewarding. So with that, I'll end. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Bob. Is that 10 minutes? Doug?
Yes. Well, before I start, I want to say that one of the great joys of working on this has been getting to know Bob Hildreth and learning from him and answering his tough questions over the years and honestly, I hope. Also, one of the joys has been getting to know two commissioners of education who put up with my occasional bouts of intemperance. And it is very much the case that this commissioner, who was opposed by our senior leadership for the commissionership, and it's really important to say it because it speaks to his character, always maintained an extraordinarily high level of professionalism in his dealing with us, and in real life that's not always what happens, and Dave Driscoll was exceptionally cordial and easy to work with as a commissioner, even though if he'd been tempted he might have wanted to take a chunk out of me as a proxy for someone, but he never did, and I think it was a measure of greatness. I like to tell stories about Chelsea because there are a lot of great stories, and some of them can't go in the book until about 20 years from now, but some of them can be told now. Just as I was leaving Chelsea, we had an event at the high school, and Paul Sheffey, the long-serving science teacher, always set up the microphones at the podium, and he'd learned over the years early on that I was kind of psycho about sound systems. It's one of the great things about Boston University that when you step to a microphone, you don't tap it and say, "Is this thing working?" You just step up and it works. 999 times out of 1,000. It's a really good, and it was one of the disciplines we took to Chelsea, is that we wanted stuff to work, and we wanted sound systems to be good so that when we had an event, it wasn't chaotic, that the superintendent or the teacher or principal stepped up and could say, "Good morning," not "Is this thing working?" With a lot of fuzz and tapping. And so I was pretty aggressive early on, even before I was superintendent, about demanding high-quality sound systems. So at the high school, Paul Sheffey, the science teacher who ran sound, would always have 2 microphones, and he'd assure me that one was a backup in case the first sound says, "Don't worry, Doug, it's going to be fine." And I'd get there early, and I'd fuss and test. And this comes from John Silver, by the way, who also does the same thing. I learned it from him. About the time I'm leaving Chelsea, I'm at an event, and there's only one microphone at the podium. And I said, "Paul, where's the backup?" And he said, "Doug, all these years, that second microphone, placebo." Which is a long way of saying that there were some great people in Chelsea who really knew how to do things, and sometimes we tested their patience a little bit. But for all those years, it was a dummy mic he had just to keep me from being too wacko about sound systems. I've divided my little talk here into several categories: big things, small things, exasperating things, and really cool things. As a way of sort of retrospective, and it does involve some the big things. And I do think the partnership is a success. I'm anything but objective about it because it's been half my life. And I got thrown into it by accident. Actually didn't want to do it, and I was drafted to be superintendent in 1995 and drawn in. But we did rebuild the district, and that doesn't just mean buildings, although it's a neat trick to bring them in on budget. But, I mean, the reality is that without the state, we couldn't have done the buildings, and so there are a lot of players in that. I think one of the big things on rebuilding was sort of the infrastructural work, which gets to sound systems, good disciplines for maintenance so you're not retreating into deferred maintenance practices, little big things that make the district run better. And it's interesting to me because I was so close to it for so long. Didn't really get much perspective, and my wife had never spent much time there. And when she finally went over towards the end of my superintendency, she said, "Douglas, you got to stop apologizing for this district because you're so in the middle of the political fights and the controversies. You don't understand. This is really well run, and things work." And I think we put a lot of time and energy into making things work. And the team that did it has still gone largely unsung. There are a lot of really good people like Paul Clementi, who's now the CFO at Bentley, who identified some of the structural financial problems in the city for the city, helped recruit the business manager for the district, Jerry McHugh, who's been there and run us on balanced budgets for eons now. He's an exceptionally good finance manager. We had a team of people here who found Jerry, sort of made sure he was the right guy and coached him in the early days, and he's a wizard with money. And that wizardry is very important because the way state funding works, for the most part, there are minor exceptions, but you don't get to keep your surpluses from one year to the next. So the trick is run your tank dry, but don't run it dry in May. You have to run it dry on the last day of school. And Jerry should do economy runs in cars because he can run a tank dry right at the end of the year. So, stable labor relations. We have our legendary Manuel Montero here in the audience who negotiated labor contracts and I think brought to the conversations with the teachers union a level of professionalism. It's funny, the public perception, if you read the Globe in the early years, was a lot of gnarly discussions, and they were gnarly. But I think at the working level, over time, we built a very calm idiom for discussing labor issues. Another big thing was corruption fighting. There's no good way, and that's to talk about it publicly, and a lot of the stories do actually have to stay in the book a long way down the line. But we did a lot to address some pretty serious problems in the district, and some of it was formal things like filing ethics charges or criminal charges. Some of it was sort of a cold war of cat and mouse, going after things that we spotted, and then in spotting them, we inadvertently telegraphed that we knew, but that at least had the effect that some of the activities went underground or stopped. That Cold War was a very important part of the work. It's one that really hasn't had a lot of attention, but it took some very good people. It took a very strong lawyer from here to work on it, and that lawyer has essentially been paid for by Boston University for all the years of the partnership. I don't know how you do it if you were in Winchendon or Fitchburg or wherever, and you didn't have a really strong lawyer pretty much at the other end of the phone or able to run over, and you're not running that tab. You don't have that picture of the lawyer looking at his clock and billing the hours. I could call Michael Rosen and get a lot of serious help on really complicated issues when I needed to. That was a huge piece of our work. The other really big thing, I think, was really demonstrating that at the end of the day what mattered was teaching and learning in the classroom. And there are a lot of elements to that. One was actually respecting teachers by being in the classroom. It took me a while to learn that the best thing I could do with a day wasn't to hang out in the superintendent's office roaring through paper. I got better at getting through it. But getting into classrooms and getting to know teachers, fixing problems for them. I didn't understand it at the time because it didn't seem like a big thing. There's a wonderful teacher named Marilyn Lipschitz in the high school, and about my first week on the job as superintendent, I walked into her classroom, and she literally corralled me by the sleeve and said, you're the superintendent, right? You look a little young, but you're the superintendent. So I need a whiteboard. What's the problem? I work that way. I need a whiteboard. That seemed obvious to me, so I went back and got her a whiteboard, and I must have done it. I did it on BU time, because that's how I'd been trained here, working for John Silver, who expects everything yesterday. So I got her a whiteboard about yesterday, and that made her really think that I was pretty good at what I was doing. More inadvertent than anything. It was just lucky. But Marilyn, I think, started telling people this one may actually be serious. So, but saying, okay, she needs the whiteboard. That's about instruction. We're going to get it done. I think that, and that was a spirit that I believe we helped bring to the district over time. Big stuff. Small things, sound systems, cubbies for teachers. I still love this when I go to Chelsea. At all the schools, the flags are now, the American flag is always slightly higher than the Massachusetts flag, which is the rule about flags. It's a battle I have not won at Boston University with our facilities people, but it's in the federal guidelines for flag usage, and if you're in the Foreign Service, you learn that the state flag is slightly below the federal flag. And they do that. Billy Norcott, chief custodian, does that, and it's one of those little attention to detail things that makes it a better district and correct. Exasperating things. This is where I get myself in real trouble. I think there are a lot of bad ideas in education, starting with John Dewey. I think we helped free people from a lot of the bad ideas. I do this for Hardin, the new dean. Small learning communities, whole language. It's a long list. It's in the articles that I write. But I think we helped free our teachers from some of the things that don't really work in real life and give them the opportunity, teachers and principals, to figure out on the ground what will work in a classroom. I don't think we were particularly doctrinaire. I just think we got to the point where we said, you figure out what works and we'll document it with assessment, and if it works, do it. Over-regulation, it's dangerous to say this while you're sitting next to a former commissioner, because I think there's a desperate need for regulation. Districts need to be regulated, but I think we fought a lot of battles over the wrong things. And in one of my classic illustrations, and I think the senior leadership in this state really did understand this and listened very carefully to this argument. So I think it's well understood. We had one instance where there was a state auditing board or quality assurance board had a hearing about Chelsea. They'd gone through our audit, and there was a hearing at the DOE in the same day. And the superintendent was asked to be both places at once, and we couldn't manage to negotiate how to get Irene Cornish to both places. So I was sent to one of the meetings as the former superintendent, said something that really ticked off the group, by the way. there's a lot in there that's the subject for an interesting conversation and a different symposium about how you provide the appropriate level of regulation and control while providing the right freedom to get things done. Had a lot of help from both the commissioners in breaking through a lot of that, and I'm grateful for that. I think activists are an interesting challenge. I think there's an interesting disconnect between people who claim to speak for a community and those who actually speak for a community. And in the early days, while we had real controversies in Chelsea, those tended to play out more with the teachers union and the school committee and real parents. But there's a sort of a parallel argument going on in the Globe and on television that had more to do with bilingual education. You know, frankly, I never found that most Chelsea parents, whatever ethnicity and language background, had a particularly strong view about some of these largely theoretical issues. They wanted their kids safe at school. They wanted toilet paper in the bathrooms. When they came in really mad at me as superintendent, they were screaming about something like that. My kid was beaten up. What are you going to do about it? And they'd be pretty heated about that. They weren't coming in saying, quoting some scholar about the meaning of culture and language. I think, and I think we got caught early on in a different conversation, which was misleading. Cool things. I think that's one of the really fun things about being drawn into this. We put music and art back in Chelsea. You don't hear about it much, but they're really great pianos. We had an Annenberg Challenge grant. We put art and music. We have beautiful classrooms, beautiful gear. Tom Kingston, the current superintendent, is a church organist and a good musician. He knows how to find really great music teachers. And so the day at the graduation, when we went from borrowing a BU band or using tape-recorded music, when there was a Chelsea instrumental group and a Chelsea chorus that could sing Love Changes Everything. You know, it takes a bit to get me teary, although the older I get, the more I do. I remember that moment when the Chelsea chorus, that Chelsea band, played Love Changes Everything, and it was a really great milestone for that community. We pulled off a lot of really nice tricks, like when the bus company stiffed us one weekend, said we're not going to have buses on Monday morning for your early learning program opening day. The medical campus of Boston University supplied us with drivers and managers, walkie-talkies, and we said to the bus company, give us your buses. We've got licensed drivers. We have a plan for Monday morning. BU people worked the whole weekend designing a transportation system because we were not going to be, we were determined to start that Monday morning and to remind the vendor that we expected service. So we had volunteers from BU who opened that day with a really fine transportation service, and somehow the bus company by the next day had figured out how to provide drivers because they were pretty embarrassed by our ability to do that. There were a lot of great stories from this university of people scrambling to make something happen for Chelsea on staggeringly short notice. The great city manager there, Guy Sandegate, called me once when I was out in Arizona at a trustees meeting as a staffer, saying we've had a total data meltdown in City Hall. Anything you can do. And we provided a team, again, one of these SWAT teams that we can put together, and they went in and restored the systems, upgraded, put on new software, and they did it in a remarkably short period of time. So there are a whole host of really nifty little stories about what happened off the front pages, in the background, where we were providing help to the community out of a general affection for the community that developed over time. I think for me, personally, the coolest thing is that I fell in love with Chelsea. And you know, for a lot of reasons, I was treated really warmly. I had a wonderful time working with people like Mary and the other. I mean, we really, at the end of the day, we do the great teaching and learning, not with the fancy people we brought in, but with Chelsea natives. And we're working now in Boston. 3 of the coaches that are supplied to the Boston Public Schools through the Step Up Initiative are retired Chelsea principals, grew up in Chelsea, worked in Chelsea. We fund 2 of them, and Harvard funds the 3rd. And we are providing help to the city of Boston with people who are really essentially trained in Chelsea under this era, but they're born and raised Chelsea folks, and getting to know those people and what they could bring, and I think on our part creating the conditions for them to do well, but using their talent, their common sense, and their work ethic, I think has been very gratifying for me. Finally, being able to take my mother to the city of Chelsea when we were building buildings, and I didn't know they put the name of the superintendent on a sign, and having my mother see my name on a sign was really, really cool. So, thank you.
is one of the rare events I want to acknowledge that I'm going to let Doug Sears have the last word. His comment about the focus on the teaching and learning and the relationships of people as fundamental to what we do in education, I think, is the model. And so I know that many of you have an event to go to in the next 15 minutes, so I don't want to hold you up for that, but I want to leave, I think oftentimes in good teaching what you do is you leave people hungry for the next question, so you'll come back. So I hope that as you think about the questions, what you heard today about a real transformative educational reform and thinking about what's next, what are the triggers? I think Mary asked the question earlier in her talk, what triggers this type of involvement? And what are the triggers we look for to move what we've learned in Chelsea, what people have seen and shared with you today, into Boston, into Revere, into Newton? And how do we as a university, and particularly a school of education, engage in that process, which is different than our core training mission of teachers, which I also believe is one of the central great parts of education, is creating great teachers, as many of you know. So we want to thank you for your time, thank the panel, and thank you. And please feel free, if you have questions and don't have that next event to go, to come up and mill and ask us for the next couple of minutes. Well, thank you.